Have you ever walked into a place you've known your whole life and suddenly felt like you didn't belong there anymore? Like every wall, every picture frame, every memory had been hiding something from you? Something waiting for the perfect moment to strike? That's exactly how I felt the night I drove to my parents' suburban home for what was supposed to be a simple family dinner. Snow had fallen earlier that afternoon, coating the quiet street in a soft white glow. The porch lights, dim and warm, flickered slightly as I climbed the steps. The house looked exactly the same as always, too perfect, too peaceful, like a magazine picture of the ideal American family. But inside I could feel it, a kind of pressure in the air, a heaviness. The type of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it surrounds your bones. I rang the doorbell. As always, there was a pause. 5 long seconds. Then the click of the lock. Then the door opening. My mom stood there with that polite smile she always wore, the one that felt rehearsed rather than real. "You're early," she said softly, stepping aside so I could enter. The warmth of the heater brushed against my cold face as I stepped inside, but it didn't ease the chill crawling up my spine. Everything was neat, organized, and strangely quiet. Even the old wooden staircase, always creaking, remained still, like it too was holding its breath. When I entered the dining room, the table was set perfectly. Golden brown roast, mashed potatoes steaming, vegetables roasted just right. Everything smelled comforting, but it didn't feel comforting. Nothing in that house ever really had. I sat down and my parents exchanged glances, quick, nervous glances that they thought I wouldn't notice. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his collar a little too often. My mother kept smoothing the tablecloth over and over, like she needed something to do with her hands. I tried to act normal, but the uneasiness around me was impossible to ignore. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for years, but tonight it felt closer than ever. We'd barely started eating when it happened. A soft thud. Something falling. Something that wasn't supposed to be seen. I looked down and saw a worn brown folder lying on the carpet beside my father's chair. Its edges were torn, the surface creased, the kind of document you'd only carry if it mattered too much to ever throw away. Before he could reach for it, I picked it up. "What's this?" I asked. My father stiffened. My mother froze. The room temperature seemed to drop. "It's nothing," he said too quickly. "Just work documents." But his voice trembled, just enough for me to hear it. My father never trembled. He was a man carved out of stone, or at least he wanted the world to believe that. Something inside me whispered, "Open it. Tonight is the night you finally see the truth." So I did. I opened the folder. And in the span of 5 seconds, my entire life changed. It wasn't my birth certificate. It wasn't my adoption papers. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. It was a death report. A report with my biological father's name printed clearly at the top. My heart slammed against my chest as I scanned the page. The date, the location, the description of the incident, everything lined up with the story my parents had told me years ago. He died in the car accident. Except this report said something else. Something darker. Something that ripped through every illusion I'd ever had about my parents. Under the cause of death, a short note was written. Scene altered. Evidence inconsistent with accident. I felt the room tilt. I felt years of unanswered questions suddenly roar back into existence. Every time they told me not to ask about my past, every time they changed the subject, every time they said, "Some things are better left alone," it all made sense now. My mother's voice cracked. "Please, it's not what you think." I looked at her. Her eyes were already filling with tears, not the kind that come from sadness, but the kind that come from being caught. I placed the report on the table, the paper slapping against the wood louder than it should have. The sound echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls like it had finally awakened something that had been sleeping for years. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, like every molecule in the air had turned to stone. My father tried to speak, but the words got stuck somewhere between guilt and fear. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as the strong, controlling man who raised me, but as someone terrified of the truth, finally standing in front of him. I leaned forward slowly, my voice steady, cold, stripped of every emotion I'd ever held back. You didn't raise a son. You created your biggest mistake. My own words sent a shiver through me, because in that moment, I understood something very clearly. This wasn't a dinner. This was the beginning of my revenge. The moment those words left my mouth, "You created your biggest mistake," something shifted in the room. Not physically, not visibly, but emotionally, atmospherically. It felt as though the house itself inhaled sharply, recognizing that the balance of power had just snapped in half. For years, my parents had controlled every detail, every conversation, every question about my past. But now, with that death report lying open on the table like a knife between us, the control was finally slipping out of their hands. My mother looked away first. She always broke before my father did. Her fingers tightened around the napkin in her lap until it crumpled completely. My father, on the other hand, didn't look away at all. He stared at me, with the kind of stare that parents give when they realize their child has become something they can no longer manipulate. He swallowed hard. "You need to calm down." Calm down. Such a typical line. Always meant stop asking questions, stop challenging the narrative. I leaned back in my chair slowly, deliberately, letting the tension stretch across the table like an invisible wire. "Calm down?" I repeated, quietly. "You hid the truth about my father's death. You lied about who I am. You covered up a crime. And you want me to calm down?" My father's jaw slipped to the side in irritation, a habit he had when he felt cornered. "There are things you don't understand. Things we did for your good." For my good? I almost laughed, but the bitterness rising in my chest wouldn't let me. Outside, a gust of cold wind hit the window, rattling it lightly. The sound filled the silence we were drowning in. I could almost imagine the snow piling against the glass, isolating the house from the rest of the world. It felt fitting. The truth had trapped us just as completely as the storm outside. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. "We didn't want you to grow up hating us." That's funny, because I'm pretty close to that right now. She flinched like I had physically struck her, but sympathy was a luxury I no longer had. I pushed the report back to my father. "Explain it. All of it. Now." He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't searching for the truth. He was searching for a version of the truth that would still make him look like a parent. The accident wasn't just an accident. Your biological father, he was involved in things, dangerous things. People were looking for him. If anyone found out you were his son, you would have been the next target. I stared at him. "So your solution was what? Kill him first?" My mother gasped. "No, he didn't kill anyone." But my father's silence spoke louder than her protest. I watched him, closely.
Watched the way his eyes shifted for just a moment, watched the guilt mask itself as anger. My pulse slowed, steady, and cold. "You altered the scene," I said quietly. "The report says the evidence didn't match an accident. Someone staged it. Someone covered it up." My father's hand balled into a fist on the table. "We did what we had to do." Those words, God, those words were worse than a confession. They weren't about protection, they were about control, about rewriting my life into a version they could manage. I stood up from the table slowly. The chair scraped across the wooden floor with a harsh, grating sound that sliced through the house. My parents both stared up at me like they were seeing me for the first time, not as their son, not as the child they thought they had molded, but as someone who now knew the truth. "You should sit," my mother whispered. "No, I'm done sitting. I've been sitting my whole life." I walked around the table until I stood directly behind my father. He didn't turn to face me. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he was afraid of the look in my eyes. Or maybe he knew, deep down, that everything was finally collapsing. "You raised me to trust you. You raised me to believe your version of everything. But you never raised me to handle the truth, because the truth would have ruined the perfect picture you were trying to paint." My father tightened his grip on the edge of the table. "We protected you." "No." My voice was ice, steady and precise. "You protected yourselves." He finally turned his head, meeting my eyes with the coldness of a man who had spent decades hiding things. "You don't know what you're getting involved in." I wasn't involved before. Now I am. And I'm going to find out everything you didn't want me to know. My mother stood from her chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, don't do this. We're still your parents." I shook my head slowly. Parents tell the truth. Parents don't rewrite history. Parents don't bury bodies, literal or metaphorical, to make their lives easier. The storm outside picked up, snow hitting the windows harder than before. It felt like the world itself was reacting, warning us, or maybe just mirroring the chaos unfolding inside the house. I looked at them for the last time that night. Not with anger, not even with hatred, but with a clarity so sharp that it cut through every lie they had ever told me. "This isn't over," I said quietly. "Tonight was just the beginning." And with that, I walked out of the dining room, out of the life they had constructed for me, and into a darkness that didn't frighten me anymore. Because now, I knew the truth. And the truth was the most dangerous weapon I had.
The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside, slicing through my coat and settling deep into my bones, as if the night itself understood the weight of what had just happened. Snow crunched beneath my boots while the porch light flickered above me, casting long, distorted shadows across the yard. It almost felt like the house was watching me walk away, like it knew something monumental had cracked open inside it. I didn't get into my car immediately. Instead, I stood on the driveway, staring at the glow inside the dining room window, where my parents still sat frozen in the aftermath of the truth. My breath rose in the air in thick white clouds, slow and rhythmic. I felt strangely calm, unnervingly calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks loose. For years, I'd wondered why certain things never added up. The way they reacted whenever I mentioned childhood memories that didn't feel like mine. The way my father always shut down any conversation about my past.
The way my mother cried on random nights, thinking I couldn't hear her. Tonight, I finally understood. I opened the car door, but didn't start the engine. I let the silence settle around me, letting the pieces of my life rearrange themselves into a new, unfamiliar shape. I didn't know the truth. Not the whole truth. Not yet. But I knew one thing. If they lied about my father's death, what else had they lied about? That question burned hotter than any anger I'd ever felt. I pulled out the death report again, the paper slightly crumpled from how tightly I'd been holding it earlier. The ink looked darker now under the car's dome light, the words sharper, crueler. Scene altered, evidence inconsistent. Every detail on the page felt like a clue, a loose thread begging to be pulled. And in that moment, revenge didn't feel like a choice. It felt like a responsibility. I drove away from the house slowly, the tires slipping slightly against the icy road. My hands were steady on the wheel. Too steady. It was unsettling how clear my thoughts were. The anger wasn't wild or messy. It was controlled, precise, like a blade being sharpened. I wasn't going home. Home didn't exist anymore, not in the way it once did. I drove to the one place I knew I wouldn't be followed. A 24-hour parking lot near an old strip mall, empty, quiet, safe enough for thinking. I parked in a corner, turned off the engine, and let the darkness wrap around me. I opened my phone and typed my biological father's name into the search bar. Even before I hit enter, something told me I wasn't ready for what I'd find. His obituary came up first, short, vague, almost dismissive. No pictures, no personal details, just a 2-line announcement and the mention of a funeral I had never been told about. Below that was a newspaper clipping from the year he died. It mentioned the accident, but the details were inconsistent with the report I had just seen. The article claimed he had been alone, but the official report suggested something different. Witnesses unaccounted for. My pulse quickened. Then I saw a familiar name in the article's comments section. My father's. Not my biological father, my adoptive one. He had posted under an old username I recognized instantly from childhood. A chill crept up my spine. His comment read, "Sometimes accidents happen for reasons we'll never understand. Some people live dangerous lives." He wrote that the day after the accident. The day after my real father died. My stomach twisted. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't grief. This was guilt disguised as philosophy. I scrolled further down until another comment caught my eye, posted by someone with the username North Harbor Witness. It was old, nearly hidden by layers of internet dust. Its comment read, "I saw the car that night. I saw someone else there. A man, tall, wearing a dark jacket. He ran before the cops arrived." My heart skipped. A tall man. A dark jacket. Someone who ran. I whispered to myself, it can't be that simple. Can it? But the image formed instantly in my mind. My father, younger, stronger, standing on the side of a dark road with a secret powerful enough to haunt him for decades. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started snapping into place. His excessive protectiveness, his anger whenever I mentioned anything, the way he always insisted on controlling my choices, my friendships, my future. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting himself from the truth, from justice, from me finding out who he really was. I leaned back against the seat, the cold leather pressing against my shoulders. My breath was unsteady now. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what had to happen next. If the truth lived anywhere, it lived in the police records, and I needed to see them. But walking into a police station as the curious son wasn't going to work, not when the investigation had been closed for decades. I needed someone inside, someone who owed me a favor, someone whose job gave them access to the kind of files normal people never see. My mind went instantly to one name: Detective Aaron Whitfield. A family friend, or at least that's what I had been told growing up. I started the car again, the headlights cutting through the snow as I pulled back onto the empty road. Tonight wasn't just the beginning. Tonight was the first step towards unraveling everything I had ever known. And deep down, I felt something dark settle inside me. A certainty. A promise. My parents weren't the victims in this story. They were the villains. And I was coming for the truth.
I stood there in that dim corner of the lawyer's office, staring at the printouts spread across the polished wooden table, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. The room smelled faintly of old paper, ink, and winter air leaking through a drafty window, but all I could focus on were the highlighted lines in front of me, lines that painted a version of the past I had never been allowed to see. My biological father hadn't just died in a crash, he had been forced into one, and someone had gone to great lengths to bury that truth. As the lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, I realized I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles had gone white. I didn't feel anger, not yet. What I felt was something colder, steadier, a kind of silence that doesn't calm you, but prepares you. The lawyer cleared his throat, not meeting my eyes. "You have to understand, your parents came to me years ago. They were scared. They told me it was all a terrible misunderstanding." He paused, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to barge in. "But your father, your real father, he wasn't supposed to die that night. He was trying to expose a financial scheme involving your adoptive father's company. He was a threat, and some people made sure he stayed quiet." His words hung in the air like frost. Every sentence he said felt like another string snapping somewhere inside me. I stepped closer, more out of instinct than intention. So they let me grow up in their house, knowing exactly what they'd done? The lawyer swallowed hard before nodding, just once, like the smallest admission he could possibly offer. Somewhere deep in my stomach, something shifted. That small, uneasy discomfort I'd carried since the dinner table had turned into something sharp. A vow, maybe. I picked up the death report printout, holding it under the glow of a small desk lamp. The edges trembled slightly, not from my hands, but from the way the lamp flickered. Who else knew? The lawyer hesitated. His eyes darted again to that door and his voice dropped. "More people than you think. Your father had enemies, and your adoptive parents, they didn't act alone." He handed me another file, and when I opened it, a list of names stared back at me. Executives, associates, people who had shaped my childhood from afar without me ever realizing it. People who had gambled with my life before I even knew how to spell my own name. I stepped back, needing space, air, anything. My fingers tingled, my pulse thumped, but my voice stayed calm, too calm. They tried to erase him. They tried to erase me. The lawyer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence in that office did the talking for him. As I gathered the papers, sliding them into a folder, the lawyer's voice finally reached me again, thin and weighted. Be careful. When old secrets come back to life, people get desperate. I looked at him, holding his gaze for the first time since I'd walked in. I'm counting on that. Then I walked out, leaving him staring after me as though he already regretted telling me anything at all. The hallway outside was cold. Too cold. My breath fogged in the air as I stepped toward the elevator, every step echoing off the narrow walls. A woman passing by offered a polite smile, but something in her expression lingered, too curious, too aware. I pretended not to notice, but I kept my eyes on the reflection in the elevator door as it opened. She slowed her walk, glanced over her shoulder, and then turned away. Suspicious? Maybe. Or maybe I was beginning to understand just how many eyes had been quietly watching me for years. When the elevator doors slid shut, I finally exhaled. Long, steady. The kind of exhale you release when a part of your life officially ends. My reflection stared back, tired, tense, but sharpened by something new. Purpose. And as the elevator descended, I felt it building slowly inside me. The certainty that I wasn't just uncovering a secret. I was stepping into a war that started long before I was born. A war that my real father never got to finish. Snow was falling when I stepped outside. Thick flakes drifted through the air like ash from a burning truth. I tightened my coat, clutching the folder under my arm, and started walking across the icy parking lot. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One message. Unknown number. Stop digging. I stopped moving. My breath hitched. The message hadn't asked. It warned. And something about its timing felt impossibly precise. I typed back slowly, letting the cold seep into my fingertips. Too late. For several seconds there was no response, just the wind scraping across the parking lot, pushing snow against my boots. Then my phone buzzed again. Then you won't survive what comes next. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. For the first time that night, I felt alive. Truly alive. Let's find out. I whispered, stepping toward my car. Because now the game was about discovering the truth. It was about making every one of them face it. One by one.
The drive back from the lawyer's office felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was the snow thickening on the windshield. Maybe it was the message still burning on my phone screen. Or maybe it was the realization that my entire life had shifted direction in the span of a single night. The headlights carved pale tunnels through the falling snow, but the world outside was a blur. White, cold, endless. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, as if the physical strain would keep my mind from spiraling. But every mile I drove only sharpened the thoughts I was trying to quiet. I kept seeing my real father's face, not because I remembered it, but because I imagined how he must have felt the night he was hunted. I pictured him gripping the steering wheel just like I was now, glancing at the mirror, realizing too late that the danger wasn't behind him, but already beside him. And then I pictured my adoptive parents, sitting comfortably in the home I'd always trusted, knowing they had a hand in the disappearance of the man who should have been raising me. That image burned like acid behind my ribs, and each breath felt heavier. Somewhere along the highway, my phone buzzed again. A single vibration, then silence. I shouldn't have checked. Driving in snow is unforgiving, but I couldn't ignore it. I glanced down. Another message from the same unknown number. You're being watched. For a moment, I thought it was just intimidation, another empty threat meant to scare me from digging deeper. But then, in my rearview mirror, two headlights appeared. Far back, barely visible through the snow, but steady. Too steady. Keeping my speed, keeping my distance. My pulse kicked up. I eased my foot off the gas, letting the car slow just enough to see if the lights behind me adjusted. They did. Exactly. My jaw clenched. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was tailing me. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension steady rather than overwhelm. Fine. If they wanted to follow me, let them. But not to my home. Not to the place where my next move would begin. I flicked on my turn signal, deliberately pulling onto a quiet exit ramp that led toward a deserted industrial area. Snow piled on the sides of the road. Streetlights flickered like dying candles. A perfect place to reveal intentions. The other car followed. Good. I turned down a narrow street lined with shuttered warehouses and loading docks, the kind of place where sound didn't travel far and secrets were easy to hide. I slowed to a stop near a broken street lamp, letting the engine idle. I waited. The other car approached slowly, then stopped about 40 feet behind me. Its headlights stayed on, glaring through the snow, obscuring the driver. A long pause. Too long. Then, the driver's door cracked open. For a second, I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Whoever was stepping out now wasn't just watching me. They wanted me to know they were here. A man emerged. Tall, heavy coat, gloves, hood up, face shadowed by the dim broken light above us. He walked toward me with the slow confidence of someone who believed they held the upper hand. I stepped out of my own car, keeping the door slightly open as a shield. Snow crunched beneath my boots. Cold air bit into my lungs. The man stopped about 10 feet away, his face still hidden by the dim broken light above us. "You should have left things alone," he said. Voice low. Accent American, West Coast maybe. Calm. Too calm. "Your parents warned you for a reason." I stared at him, feeling the anger I'd been suppressing all night crawl up my spine. "They're not my parents," I said. "They're just the people who lied the loudest." He tilted his head. "You talk like you know what you're walking into." "I know enough," I replied. "Enough to recognize a threat when I see one." He took one slow step forward, boots crunching deliberately. "This isn't a threat," he murmured. "It's a warning. Walk away now, or you'll end up exactly where your father did." The world went silent. Not just quiet. Silent. Even the wind paused, as if waiting for my response. I took one step forward, too. "Then you already know my answer." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, he exhaled through his nose, disappointed. "Shame," he said. "We were hoping you'd be smarter." He turned to walk back toward his car, and for a second, I thought he was simply retreating. But just before he reached the door, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "We're done being patient." Then he got in, slammed the door, and the car peeled away, tires skidding over snow, taillights vanishing into the white. I stood there, breathing hard, snow collecting on my coat, the cold sinking into my bones. And yet, I felt strangely steady, as if the confrontation had clarified something inside me. They weren't hiding in shadows anymore. They weren't pretending. They were stepping forward, showing themselves. Good, because that meant they were scared. And scared people make mistakes. I got back into my car, hands still shaking slightly, and drove off toward the only place that made sense now. The place where everything had started. My parents' suburban house. They wanted a war? Fine. But I wasn't coming unprepared. Not anymore.
The suburban streets were almost unrecognizable under the thick blanket of snow. Streetlights glowed like distant lanterns, their halos blurring in the swirling wind. As I drove toward my parents' house, the house where every family photo, every birthday, every memory had been built on lies, I felt the strange stillness settling inside me. Not calm, not peace, something colder, something that comes when you finally understand the cost of the truth and accept it anyway. Their house appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac, warm lights glowing softly behind frosted windows, a perfect picture of safety, of comfort, of everything they wanted the world to believe they were. My tires crunched up the driveway, and as the engine clicked into silence, I sat there for a moment, staring at the place I once called home. If walls could talk, these would scream. I stepped out into the cold, folder tucked under my arm, breath fogging in the air. The world felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with tension. I walked up the porch steps and paused at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. I pushed it open, slowly. They were waiting. My mother stood near the fireplace, hands clasped tightly, eyes red and swollen. My father sat on the armchair, posture stiff, jaw set in the familiar way he used whenever he tried to look in control. The illusion didn't work anymore. Not tonight. "You shouldn't be here," my father said, voice strained by something he couldn't hide. Not authority. Fear. I closed the door behind me. "You should have thought about that 20 years ago." My mother stepped forward, tears welling. "We did what we had to." "No," I cut in. "You did what protected you. Not me, not him. Just you." The folder hit the coffee table with a sharp slap. Pages spilling out, death reports, financial records, names, phone logs, the entire rotten architecture of their secret. My father stared at it like it was a bomb. "I went to see your lawyer. He told me everything, every detail you hoped I'd never discover." My father stood, slowly. His voice dropped into a low, warning tone. "You don't understand the world we were dealing with. I understand enough. Enough to know you let a good man die because he got in the way of your ambition, and then you took his son, raised him under your roof, fed him birthdays and Christmas mornings and fake love while praying he never discovered the truth." My mother's breath broke. She clutched at her chest. "We loved you." "Did you?" I asked quietly. "Or did you love the version of me that didn't know who he really was?" Neither answered. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. The fireplace crackled behind them, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. I stepped closer, eyes locked on my father. "You had someone follow me tonight." His jaw twitched, a tiny betrayal of control. "I told them not to hurt you." I laughed, an empty, exhausted laugh. Well, they weren't exactly listening. My father exhaled, shoulders sagging. "You have no idea how dangerous these men are. You're digging into something you cannot fight alone. Good thing I'm not alone." He blinked. "What do you mean?" I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small recording device. His eyes widened, just a fraction, but enough. I held it up between us. "Everything they told me. Everything your lawyer said. Everything the man who followed me threatened. I recorded it." I tossed it on the table beside the scattered papers. His face drained of color. "Who?" I leaned forward slightly. "Your business partner, the one you think is loyal, the one who hates you just enough to use this when it benefits him most." My mother gasped, turning toward him. "You said everything was under control." He snapped, "Be quiet." There it was, the crack, the truth in its purest form, not the kind that hides in paperwork, but the kind that slips out when fear
has nowhere else to go. You're not afraid of me, I said softly. You're afraid of losing everything you built on a lie. He glared at me, but it wasn't anger. It was defeat, pure, unfiltered, undeniable. What are you planning to do? I stepped back, hand on the doorknob. I'm going to let the truth do to your life what you did to his. My father took a step forward. If this gets out, we won't survive it. I paused, holding his gaze. I know. My mother began to cry, her sobs filling the house like a sound that had been waiting 20 years to escape. My father stood frozen, watching helplessly as the world he controlled slipped out of his grip in real time. I opened the door. Cold wind rushed in, pushing snow across the floor. You didn't raise a son, I said, my voice steady, calm, and finally, unburdened. You raised your reckoning. And with that, I walked out into the night. The door clicked shut. The snow fell, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of the past finally lift. Not because the story was over, but because my story had finally started.